Hello, welcome to Chapter 1 of Information Systems. In this chapter, we're going to look at the first reading in your book, which is Chapter 1, and we're going to cover some of the broad topics in the chapter, but this in no way should or can replace actually doing the reading. So, let's look at some of our objectives for this lecture to find out what we want to accomplish. The first learning objective we have is to kind of briefly go over some of the 9 learning objectives in the book. That ranges from the common applications of computer information systems, the differences between computer literacy and information literacy, the types of information systems, whether they be TPS or MIS, the components of data, and understanding how data turns into information. We're also going to look at some of the applications of information systems in the functional areas of business. I like to call it information systems in the wild. Next, we're going to take a quick look at the competitive advantage, the business implications of information systems. And we're going to look at the 5 forces model, the strategies to gain a competitive advantage, what competitive advantages are out there. And then finally, we're just going to look at some jobs in IT. Now, the reading will go on further to look at kind of the future of information systems. And even though we're not going to cover that stuff in the lecture, it is going to be a part of the quiz and the exam. So make sure you're doing those readings. I'm going to say that maybe 30 times during this lecture. Make sure you're doing those readings. You're going to hear me give you that common refrain over and over and over. So let's start with computers in our daily life. When we think of computers, you're probably thinking about the personal computing that you're doing now. So that's probably you at your laptop or at a desktop computer, and you have a computer in your hand, which is a smartphone, and those are the computers that you think about when you think about in your daily life. We want to abstract back a level and look at the computers that are in your daily life but are really a part of bigger systems. So the first system is industry. Now, the computers that we use in industry are there for the prime goal of return on investment. Computers used in industry are there to reduce costs and to give a competitive advantage. And there's a lot of different types of information systems that do that, and we'll cover them. But industry is going to be a big portion of our lecture today. We're going to look at how computers are reshaping industry and how industry is reshaping computer systems. Another example of that is computer information systems in the college environment. So if you think about what you're doing right now, you are taking a class remotely via a computer. Now there's a backbone that's holding this video, it's YouTube. There's another information system that you went to find this video, which is Blackboard. And there's another information system that feeds into Blackboard, which is Banner, or TopNet is I think how you guys refer to it. So there's a lot of information systems embedded in different walks of life that are somewhat ambiguous or in the background to our day-to-day life. So there's 2 examples, and the last one is when you're shopping, the point of sale. Here's another example of where you are interacting with a computer that you may not recognize as a computer, and that your one interaction, credit card to credit card machine, is a part of a huge system of information ranging for inventory, financial information, and probably also in marketing. So there's a lot of computer systems around us in daily life. They, for the most part, are hidden to ensure that they don't interrupt the experience you have when you're shopping or when you're at school or when you're interacting with industries. But those information systems are there, and they are the backbone of those systems. So to make sure that we're all speaking the same language, for the purposes of this course, when we talk about computer information technology, and I represent that here by computer, or we're talking about an information system, we're going to consider those the same thing. So if I say information technology in one instance, or I say information system in another, go ahead and let those mean the same things for the purposes of this course. Now, of course, information technology is more hardware. Information systems is software using those hardware to get together. But for the most part, it's about the same thing. So let's all get on the same page, get comfortable with these different terms, and then we can move on. In the reading, which you should read, there is a glossary of key terms. And if you are anything like I was when I was an undergraduate, I just read the bolded words and tried to memorize those. Please don't do that. I can tell you more stories of how I could have been a better student. That's the first thing, is by reading more than bolded words. But those bolded words are going to be some of the highlights that we're looking at here, but we're not going to cover them all. But one that is key to our understanding is known for this course: information technology and information systems are going to mean the same thing. And our author is going to go back and forth using those to represent the same thing. So before we can get started, let's tell you the difference between computer literacy and information literacy. Now, computer literacy is something that you should have tackled in CIS-141. I have taught that course in the past. I'm actually teaching it now. And with computer literacy, we're looking at using software. So, first, what is software, and then how to use it. Productivity software like Office, social media software like Facebook, Twitter. What are these different software components? Are they word processors? Are they spreadsheets, database management systems, presentation software? So that computer literacy looks at using software that's already been created, having a basic understanding of computer hardware. So if you could open up the case on the computer, you can look in there and say, you know what, that is a CD drive versus that which is a hard drive or a piece of RAM. And then finally, do some basic troubleshooting. Once you're computer literate, if your computer starts acting up, hey, why don't I restart? And then when it comes back up, that in many cases solves it. And that's kind of some basic computer literacy. And I kind of represent that with this person with a little help desk here. You at least know the right questions to ask to this help desk person to know how to fix your computer issue. So that's computer literacy. Now that is very different than information literacy, okay? Information literacy is how do we understand the role of information in generating business intelligence. And so the question is, what is business intelligence? Business intelligence is getting information, and I say information because it's different than data, and we're going to cover that later. Getting information that you can use to make intelligent business decisions. Now, that is, again, a part of this return on investment cycle. Information systems is built around creating value of the information that you have. In essence, any business intelligence is you learning either about things that have happened in the past, things that are happening currently, and being able to predict out things you think will happen, and using that knowledge to make good, sound business decisions and increase the value of your business operation and to maximize on your environment. The reason this course is a part of that core curriculum for the Gordon Ford College of Business is because business is, this information is integral to the business understanding of getting a good return on value for your business productivity time. And you can see here, this happens a lot in industry. And we're going to look at different systems where you have, the machinery in the background, the information about the machinery in the forefront next to an operator who uses that to make business intelligent decisions and create more value. It's not just about having a cog, but it's about having that cog doing its role in that greater machine the most efficiently as possible, optimizing and creating some value out of that. Okay. And this is where we see competitive advantages come from. If I'm using my business intelligence and I can have my machine produce 10 more widgets, or you sell 5 more widgets over the same amount of time as my competitor who doesn't have those information insights, well, I'm going to win. So, information intelligence. Now, let's jump right into where information systems began. And the beginning was with something called TPS. So these are transaction processing systems. Now, these systems, in essence, they just automated very repetitive tasks. So the first thing they would do is collect data. So, you know, if you were to order some clothing, well, let's take the example of a textile company, textile making clothing. So I'm ordering how much cotton I need. Well, that order information, that data collection would go into a TPS system. I made a transaction, which means I did a business activity, and it recorded it. Okay. Now, these systems also did some rudimentary data processing, which means, in essence, they would look at the data and then say, you know what, maybe you need to order some more fabric, or maybe you need more thread. So it would tell you those types of things. It wasn't really giving you kind of business decision-making frameworks, but it would let you know where you were at in these collections of data. The other thing these systems were good at were doing repetitive tasks. So instead of having to do inventory by hand and do all these kind of inventory reviews by going over it time and time again, we'd have kind of a rudimentary database here that would do that stuff for you. You wouldn't have to really go in and redo the work you've already done. It could do that. And then finally, it did some autonomous work. So when it came to managing inventory, once you did the transaction, it would do all the data collection, the processing on its own, and then give you those values for you to use to do more. Now, where we see this is in a couple places. First, inventory, like we've talked about, deliveries, and even in payroll. You know, payroll is a very autonomous type of system. And if we look at the 4 things we have up here, you know, the data collection, it has the information for whom to pay. The data processing, it takes the hours, it turns that into the amount of pay that should be paid. The repetitive task is that it does this for every person that should be paid. And the autonomous piece is that it does it automatically. It knows on a certain date, all right, to payroll's on Friday, it's Wednesday. Let's review everyone who's in the system. Let's collect their hours. Let's calculate how much pay they should get. Let's give Uncle Sam his piece of the pie, and then let's issue the checks. So these are the kind of the first level of information systems that just made life a little bit easier for us. You know, there's not a whole lot of AI at work here, but there is a great deal of distilling what can be done by a computerized system and giving that over to the system. Okay. After that, we moved into management information systems. Now, management information system, first is kind of a collaboration of resources. It's where we took hardware and software technologies through some data, some process, and some other human elements in there to really start creating systems that generate business intelligence, stuff that we can use to make good decisions. Now, as we said, it assists in decision making. So that also means that it requires that human resource to be trained on how to interpret the data that it gives back out. But it can really give you some return on investment, and it's designed to produce information in a timely, relevant, and accurate way. And this is, again, important for making good decisions. The timeliness piece can't be stated enough because, you know, knowing what's the best business move to make for 2014 is of no use to you in 2015. You need that information. You need it when you need it. You don't need it after you could have used it, and you don't need it so far ahead in the future. Right now, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for McDonald's to make out a plan for serving food to androids, robots, because they don't exist, they don't eat. So that's not really going to help with decision making. So it is timely. And then each one of these are objective based. So it means that these systems are what we would call expert systems. I don't think they cover that in the book, but an expert system is a system that is good at one particular task. And that's what most of these systems are. They do one thing really, really well and give you great decision-making capability on that one thing. And some of their designing involves figuring out what the objective is of that one system. So I've got a, TPS system. It's going to track transactions. Well, the objective is to track transactions, figure out a way to collect and analyze data for the mission of the system, and then provide information in a useful format. And in essence, we're talking about a human interface, a way that people can see this data, this information, and it makes sense. And then it's used broadly. This is not just some cutting edge piece of technology that's only used in Silicon Valley. That may have been the case 20 or 30 years ago, but these information systems, like we talked about, they're in industry, they're in the public sector, they're in higher education, they're in nonprofit groups, and they're in private, they're social media, they're everywhere. They are very integral to everything that people are doing in their day-to-day lives. So now that we've talked about a management information system at this high level, kind of this abstract of what management information systems are, let's talk about the components of a management information system. And this is kind of the 4 things that every management information system does. And we're not going to talk about the end use for the information system right now. Not that these people use it and these people don't, but these are the 4 critical pieces that go into what we consider an information system. And in this little chart here, you can see it starts with data, it builds to a database, it then processes, and then it creates information. Now, we see data in here twice, and then we got data and information, and this seems like this is all the same thing, but it is not. We actually have 4 key steps, and let's take a look at each of those now. So when we're talking about data, you should think of data as just a generic statistic. So for example, an item, a datum, is your height. Just so if I'm 6'4", so my height 6'4". That's generic. It's meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. But if we collect a lot of different pieces of data, we can do things with it. Now, where does data come from? Well, obviously there are internal sources of data. So if it's a company, I can collect data from my employees. If it is a government, I can collect that data from my constituencies, from the citizens I serve. If it is a niche market, I can collect data about the consumers in that niche market. So that's that's external data. And so internal is collecting data from people that are directly related to the system. External sources are collecting data from people who the system is going to give you some intelligence about. So customers, competitors, suppliers, getting data from government sources when you are not a government entity. Those sources are external to the organization, and the internal sources are internal to the organization. Now, the thing about data is, we talked about it earlier, it is time specific. So data should only be viewed in the context in which it was collected. And I think that's pretty obvious. The book will talk about it a little bit more, but I think we get that. When you get a data point, you have to put it in the context of when you collect it. And then finally, we collect it in two ways. We either get individual items, which is, my height, 6'4", or we get aggregated items, the average height of an African-American teacher in the Gordon Ford College of Business who is a male is not 6'4". So now we kind of have an individual and an aggregate group of data, but that is still data. So aggregate is useful for reporting over a time span. Disaggregated or individual is useful in analyzing an individual product or a territory salesperson or whatnot. And to kind of illustrate this, we got a funnel. So those little ones and zeros, that's data, and that's going into the system. Now, where are we storing all this? And we're going to put it in a database. Now, a database, in essence, is a collection, just a collection of relevant data, and it's organized into files. And once we put it in files, once we have this data storage, and we drop it into files, we begin to call it a database management system, DBMS, okay? Now, there's a couple things we should know. Note, every working information system, management information system, is going to have a database at its heart, okay? And you see this a little in Excel, but Excel is more of a data set, and Access, which we're looking at, is more of a database. And those are in the SAMS projects, and we'll get to Access in the second half of the semester. So this stuff is essential, and what these databases do is not only do they, store this data, they allow us to kind of have CRUD operations. And CRUD is a computer science term we use. It stands for the ability to create, remove, update, and delete data. So that's kind of a CRUD or whatever. In the book, we talk about how you can create data, you can organize it, you can manage it, you can do all these things that are important. And then finally, it saves time. Once we get data into a database, we can reduce the number of people who have to interact with that data to get a meaning out of it. And it's in one central location where we can do some processing. And you can see here a database kind of represented by large groups of things stacked on one another. So that's kind of the database that we're thinking about. So we've got the data, we've stored it in a database. Well, now it needs to undergo some processing. And this is a very critical step. This is where we turn data into information, okay? And we'll talk about what information is. But when we do the processing, not only is it important, but it is based on some models. It is based on a paradigm that we think will give us information. So this is kind of like Stephen Covey, one of his habits. You have to begin with the end in mind here. You have to know what type of system you want to build the processing step to turn data into that type of specific information. We see it a lot in in a TPS system, transaction processing. It creates reports. It creates models for people to consume. And the other type of systems we'll talk about later, we'll talk about what deliverables come from this processing. And this is where the computer hardware really does the work. This is where we take this data, the database, which is software, we really crunch it into ones and zeros and have it process out some meaningful information. Now, information, there's a lot to cover here, so we're just gonna hit it at a very high level, and I do want you to really dig in in the reading to understand this process, because this is critical to everything we talk about in this course. So when we think of information, it's going to give us facts. It's going to tell us things that we can know are happening in this environment that we're in. It's going to be timely. And that's the other thing about information, is that it's not late. It's when you need it. and it's going to be integrated. It's the integration of all that data that we felt like was relevant into information. Now, here's what you need to know about information. Information is used for decision making. So it has to be consistent, it has to be accurate, it has to be relevant, and it should have a user interface. So that user interface may be charts, it may be graphs, but it needs to have something that makes it easy for a human being to look at, understand, and then discern value. And this is the big difference between data and information. Data, for the most part, is nothing but a collection of numbers or symbolic text. Information comes from when either a person or a system collects all the data it needs, looks over it, and organizes and runs key statistics, frequencies, analysis over that data, and then creates information which is critical for doing business. When we think about the economy, the government takes hundreds of thousands of data items from employment, and then it processes it and puts out an employment report. And then the stock market behaves based on this employment report. So what you can see is that we went from data to a database by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They do some processing and they create information in the form of an employment report. And the world changes based on this report. Presidents lose elections based on this report. The market either rises or falls based on this information. So, the criticalness of that processing, how it's done, and when that information comes out, can make or break nations and change the world. So information systems have a much broader impact than taking an hour and a half out of your week to go over this lecture, but it really will impact the world in which we live. So information systems in the wild. Well, we talked about industry. So, there it is. Out there, when you purchase something, you're interacting with an information system. Again, it's in education and it's in shopping. And the way that those are very at the top, but beneath all those other uses of information technologies is the internet itself. That is an information system that you interact with so often that you probably don't even recognize that you're interacting with an information system. Something that's very interesting that they do now, kind of in this shopping piece and also in the industry piece, is that these warehouses, objects are not tracked by individuals walking them around as much as they are tracked by little tags, little RFID, radio frequency information, identification tags. And these objects are communicating data about themselves as they move through buildings, cities, the nation, and even in the world. And if you're anything like me, you buy things off Amazon and you get that little tracking number. And there's a great example of objects communicating information about themselves in the wild. It is a very interesting and a cool thing to think about. The other piece is there are 4 M's of resources. Now, this is covered in the book. I'm not going to tell you what those are. I want you to do the readings, but they play a really key role. And I'm going to talk to you about just the last M, which is money. Now, when you're managing the 4 M's of resources, most of us individually only focus on money because that's what we want more of. That's why we came to college. That's what we're interested in. But industries and information systems actually manage 3 other M's, and I'm going to leave that to you to find out and to dig a little into, and that will be covered on the quizzes and the exams. So, we've talked broadly about information systems. We've talked about the criticalness of moving data into databases, processing those databases, and creating information. And we've also, through this, we've built some information literacy at a very cursory level, but we need to take one more look at these information systems in the wild and not just focus on the three that we've covered, but look at the different systems and what we call these systems that are out here among us in the trees of this urban jungle that we call society. So let's start with something that's close to home, and it's information systems that support people. Okay, so the first one is a personnel information system, and if you've ever had a job, you've been in one of these personnel information systems. These type of systems would be the systems that do payroll, or the systems that manage your tax paperwork for a company, or know your hours or whatnot. Though that system, along with kind of a more thought out human resource information system, control what you don't control, but understand your behaviors while you're at work. And the human resource information systems, we really see a lot of things based on your wellness, your health. And when you move into the professional world after college, many of those benefits that you are looking for in the place you want to work, they're going to be managed either by a personnel information system or a human resource information system. And you're always going to see a very sharply dressed individual who you can ask questions in human resources. Before we leave this, there's a key distinction I want to bring up, and it's between an intranet and an internet. Okay, the internet is a broadly connected network, but an intranet is something that is only used within a specific organization. So it's almost like a small sandboxed portion of the internet. And if you think about a sandbox, it's just, it's a box that has walls and the sand is in there but cannot get out. And that's what information in these intranets is supposed to accomplish. Now, we have seen in the past with all these data breaches that it's really not happening that way in many organizations, but that's what that intranet is there for. So we've seen people. Let's talk about information systems in industry. Now here we get some words that are really fun: logistic information systems and manufacturing information systems. Now with both of these, we're going to see logistics. Mostly, it's going to focus on the cost of moving things around. So just moving objects and moving objects safely. Most logistics organizations also are transportation or freight organizations. I think UPS even had a song called "It's Logistics." So the information they use to manage these complex systems of routing and getting a package from one place to another goes into a logistics information system. Now, a manufacturing information system operates with the same group many times, but it focuses on the actual construction of a product. It will help you to understand manufacturing costs and reduce them, to increase the quality of the product, and to make better inventory decisions. Those two are pretty straightforward. The author talks a little bit more about each one, and I think it is worth a read. And then finally, service information systems. And with this, we kind of look in two different types of services, business services. The first is financial information. So this is banking to investments, accounting. When I think of financial information systems, the first thing that comes to mind is the people on Wall Street, those financial advisors, those large investors. This is what they use to make the decisions that drive the overall economic market. And then next is the marketing information systems. And if you remember these 4 P's, gold star to you, this is the information system that, given a product organization, tracks the price, the promotion, the place, and the product. And using those kind of 4 things, it can help them make better informed decisions. The marketing information system at Apple Computing is probably very complex. the marketing information system at a mom and pop cupcake store is probably not very complex, but there's some place where this information is being stored and used to make some decisions. And both of these two are really good at helping you create value down deep in the data. And we'll talk about how we do that a little bit later when we look at the focuses of these information systems. All right. So to wrap it up, information systems are there for a competitive advantage. We're going to look at Michael Porter's model for competing in a marketplace. He was a professor at Harvard Business School, and he looked at 3 key things to determine how an organization competes. The first thing he talked about was cost leadership. And with cost leadership, in essence, that's an organization reducing the cost of its product, making sure it makes it as cheaply as it can. And, that's by creating efficiencies. And that's by just reducing overall cost. So that's kind of one place we see information systems. The next one is in differentiation. And this is by you taking your product and making it different from the competitor. Now that means you have to understand the competitor's offering, and you have to really design it with a difference in mind. And that is supported a lot by these information systems. And finally, some top line strategies to focus. And this is where we, with a microscope, we just really focus in to figure out where can we generate new money, where can we use enterprise systems to reduce costs and improve our product. So where the cost leadership was focusing on cash, the focus was focusing on process. What can we do to really change the process to make it more profitable? So this is the competitive advantage we're trying to build with information systems. And, you should see my hands while I'm presenting this. This is exciting stuff. This is where the entrepreneur in you can find an opportunity to use these skills, this Excel knowledge, this Access knowledge, this knowledge of information systems, to really take something you're doing and turn it into a creative work that produces return on investment for you. And then let's take another step to see the business environment. And here we're talking about the 5 forces of the business environment. It starts with an analysis. So you need to understand the environment that you're in. And in this environment, there are 5 features that the author brings out, or 5 forces that you are interacting with. The first one is buyer power. We'll look at this in a second. Then supplier power, the threat of substitutes, substitute products, substitute services, the threat of new entrants. This is new people coming into that market. And then finally, rivalry among existing competitors. And I think just from saying those, you probably have a good idea, but we're going to take a little deeper look so we can see how all 5 of these connect into the greater whole and understand when you're in one type of environment versus another. So if we take a look at a chart here, we can see that in the center is kind of the industry competitors. And there is always some type of rivalry between these competitors, whether it be small rivalries or very big rivalries. Pepsi and Coke have a huge rivalry. They are competing directly with one another, and they're not shy about it. They're talking to one another. But, in other industries, the rivalries may not be that pronounced. And a lot of times the rivalries are always among big players, not really small players. Now, around the industry in the center, we see all these different things kind of pointing inward. The first is at the top, the threat of new entrants. So every time, if I make a widget and someone else begins to make that widget, now I have a new competitor. And just their entrance alone changes the market. And if they're pursuing a cost leadership strategy and I am pursuing a focus strategy, trying to make the best product I possibly can, and a differentiation strategy, I need to keep an eye on this new entrant because they may take some of my market share because they're doing it cheaper, and I may lose customers that even though I'm doing it better, it still costs more. So potential entrance is something one needs to be aware of. And it's, the threat here is low when it's hard to create or recreate what the industry is already doing. And the focus strategy, what we talked about, is the best way to kind of shield against this. Now, as we move around the circle, we will go clockwise. The next one is buyer power. Now, buyer power is when customers have a really large selection, a big choice. And in essence, it means the buyer is controlling the market. So if you think of this, where do you have a lot of buying power? For the most part, it's at grocery stores. Just in this city alone, if you want to buy groceries, well, you can go anywhere to do it. You can get milk at a gas station. You can get it at a small grocery store. You can get it at a mega store. And if you're courageous, you can buy it online. I would not, but you have buying power when it comes to these small commodities. And its buyer power is high when buyers have a lot of choices. Now we're going to flip to the other side of the chart and talk about supplier power. Now this is where the suppliers have far more control than you because there are fewer options. If you're interested in buying a private jet locally, well, you're going to have to take whatever private jet options there are, unless you're willing to go to a different market. To bring it even closer, we don't have a whole lot of computer retailers in Bowling Green. So if you want a computer and you want it the day that you decide to order it, for the most part, you're going to Best Buy, Walmart, or Target. There's not a whole lot of places you can go to get that computer, and you are subject to the prices they have. You really can't do a whole lot to make a lot of wiggle room there. So the bargaining power of suppliers is strong in that particular portion of the market in our little city. And then finally is the threat of substitutes. If you're making, again, widgets, and not only did someone come into the market, but they're making the exact same product or the same service. You're a barber and a new barber opens up in the city and they're doing the same haircuts you can. Well, that is a big threat. Now, if you have a differentiation strategy, that can help to kind of keep you viable. But all of these different forces are taking a toll, are making an impact, and changing the decision-making equation for companies, for individuals, for organizations. And looking at this, information systems can help us combat these forces and to understand what we need to do to adapt. Because this is all about making good decisions when the world throws little curveballs in our direction. So we've talked about, at this point, we started out understanding the difference between computer literacy and computer information systems. We talked about information systems and how they take data and turn it into databases and then processes that into information. Then we looked at the different types of information systems. We made references to the 4 M's, which you're going to research independently outside of this lecture. We looked at the different strategies that Michael Porter put before us. And we've also looked at the 5 forces that information systems have to deal with. Well, now we're just going to briefly look at the different jobs that are in information technology, in information systems. And some of these you're going to be very familiar with. Some of these will probably be very new. So the first one is a CTO or a CIO. And the C stands for chief. So the chief technology officer, the chief information officer. Excuse me. This person is the boss when it comes to information for their organization. They do the strategy, the long range stuff, and they're the ones that stay up to date. This is the Sheryl Sandberg of the group. She's leaning into this information, which is a good book. I encourage you to read it. But she's taking charge of the technology for her organization. Next is the CPO. This one's fairly new, but this is a Chief Privacy Officer. This comes out of the recent failures over the past couple years of organizations to keep what information is private. Hackers are beating them, so now they're putting one person, kind of a czar of privacy, in these organizations to make sure that they're keeping their information safe. And the interesting thing about this is that when we think of privacy, we think of our personal information, our social securities numbers and all that. But when Sony was hacked a year or so ago, not only did they lose their personal information, but many of their products were just information. A movie boils down to a distilled group of information in a movie file. And they've got to keep that private. They've got to control it to stay competitive. And if someone reaches in there and pulls it out and gives it away for free, ask yourself the question, are you likely to pay for a movie after you saw it for free? And if the answer is no, then the burden of this Chief Privacy Officer is very important. Same thing with the CTO or CIO. They've got to make sure that they're respecting privacy laws, but they have to keep their information private as well. So after that, we've got information system managers, and these are people who work for the CTO or the CIO to make sure that everything is up to snuff. We've got analysts. These are people who are responsible for understanding and designing the systems. And then after the analysts, we have administrators, and these are network and database administrators, and it's their job to keep these systems doing what they were designed to do. That the analyst comes in and says, this is what you need. The administrator says, thanks, we'll keep it going. And then after that, we've got programmers and developers. That's where my training is, to do programming and code. And then at the bottom, we kind of have webmasters, and not at the bottom, but lastly in this alphabetical list, except for analysts. And the webmaster does exactly what you think. And to give you some insight into what these jobs actually look like, on campus in the Career Center, that's the place where I work, we maintain a job data bank called CareerLink. And here's just a sampling of some of the jobs that are available to WKU students if they were to log in. A web developer, systems administrators, content developers, and one's in Evansville, one's in Bowling Green, one's in Paducah. So these information systems positions are all around us. If you're taking this course, it's likely you're in business informatics or CIS as your major, and you need to start thinking about these different job opportunities today. The job market out there is at least very competitive, but really super competitive. For these positions, even though this is one of the high growth fields, there are a lot of growth and a lot of money to be made out there in information systems. You still have got to demonstrate that you are the person for these jobs, and it starts more at this level than it does up here at the top. But down here, you've got to start planning to do these things early in your academic career so you can get those legitimate experiences to make you a good fit. So that's the jobs in information systems. Lastly, we're going to just spend a brief moment and look at the outlook for the future of IT, and then we'll begin to wrap up. So when we think of the outlook for the future, there's a couple common things that IT or information technology that we always expect. We always expect that hardware and software will get cheaper, that what it costs to do something a year ago will not cost that much to do it next year. But we also expect artificial intelligence and computer networking to improve. We expect that not only will the computer itself get cheaper, but it's going to get smarter. Our phones are, we consider our phones smart just because they do some cool things. That makes them very smart. So we expect them to get smarter. We want Siri to do better. We want Google Now to know more. And the more that these systems know and the smarter they get, the bigger the threat of computer crime. So we know that if the good guys get faster computers, so do the criminals. If there's AR that's built to make our lives easier, there's AI that is built to take information from us, to steal our credit card information. And information systems will play a large role in this future. The information systems are that kind of smart cog in the center, that information, that artificial intelligence, and it will play a critical role in protecting us from information that cyber criminals are out to collect. And it's going to become more and more difficult. That's why we need you guys to get good grades, graduate, and help us build these systems. Just some image credits for all the images I used in this presentation. Not a big deal there. And then finally, do the readings. This lecture will not cover everything. Some things were left out intentionally, but other things I just didn't cover. The readings are very important. I wish there was a word that was more very than very, so you could understand the importance. You got to do these readings, but other than that, this is the lecture for week 2. It's over chapter 1. There will be a quiz that shows up at the end of the week. You have to take it during the Thursday or Friday period when it's available. And if you have not done the readings, that quiz is going to be insurmountable. So do the readings. Those points are important. The readings are important. And thank you for your time.